So our roundtable today is titled The Role of Police Recruitment and Community Engagement Programs in Building Stronger Relationships Between Police and Communities. My name is Crystal. I'll be serving as the moderator for this particular roundtable. I'm a research analyst here at RTI in our Investigative Sciences program. I'll be joined by Dr. Jennifer Rainier. Jen is an expert in health and well-being of employees and organizations. She sits in our Center for Policing Research and Investigative Science as well, and applies her academic background in industrial and organizational psychology and occupational health to workplace and workforce surveys, qualitative studies, employee trainings, and evaluations in criminal justice contexts. Dr. Eric Hutchinson is also joining us. He's the owner of Hutchinson Consulting and works to make a measurable difference in how organizations assess, select, and develop employees while fostering a high-performance environment. Eric has assisted with the design, development, and administration of public safety job analysis, examinations, both entry-level and promotional, and the training of community members who participate as community evaluators in our police and fire selection process. Sergeant Ryan Todd with the Greensboro Police Department is also joining us. Sergeant Todd has been there for just over 17 years, where he now oversees the Recruiting and Background Investigation Unit. Sergeant Todd is a community member of Greensboro Police Department's LGBT+ task force and was recently on Greensboro's Safer City Summit Equal Housing Coalition. Commander Kevin Warwick will also be joining us. He started his law enforcement career in 2001 with the Green Bay Police Department. Over the past 19 years, Commander Warwick has held positions as a patrol officer, field training officer, field training supervisor, patrol lieutenant, and captain. He is currently the commander of operations for the Green Bay PD, Mimi Stiles is also joining us. Jamelia is a founder and visionary behind Measure. Ms. Stiles holds a Bachelor of Science in Communications, Masters of Public Administration, and a certification in performance measurement, and is also a subject matter expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then finally, we'll be joined by Dr. Lorenzo Boyd, who is a national recognized expert in police community relations and an authority on urban policing. Dr. Boyd currently serves as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and is a former director of the Center for Advanced Policing at the University of New Haven. His 14-year service as a deputy sheriff in Boston informs his 20-year career in higher education. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rainier.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm doing my own sound check now.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. Sweet. We'll see if I can coordinate between my screen sharing and my sound and my video. I will try my best. Let's see. Trying to advance. Okay. So I want to leave most of the time in this session for our fantastic panelists, so I'm going to try to keep this pretty brief. Now that I see how much lag there is in the slides advancing, I wish I didn't have that past slide. Okay, so in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the relationship between recruiting and hiring, community engagement efforts, and police-community relations. And I'm also going to talk about a couple of RTI projects that examine various aspects of this topic. So when I think about how recruiting and hiring relate to community engagement and the relationship between police and community members, I find it helpful to ask the question, what determines how people carry out their jobs? My background's in workplace psychology, so this is the framework that I bring to these issues, like Crystal mentioned. So what does determine what people actually do at work and how they do it? So you can think about it in terms of three major categories, right? There are the formal requirements and expectations, the kinds of things that are in a job description. There are also barriers and facilitators to successful performance. These are things like, having enough bandwidth in terms of time and resources, and having clear guidance on how to do the work. We can think of community engagement as one of these components of the job. So that's why I have it kind of sitting underneath there. Then how people do their jobs is also influenced by their knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs. And there are certain KSAs that people bring with them when they first start a job, and this is where recruiting and hiring play a major role. but KSAs can also be developed through training and on-the-job experience. Finally, what people do at work is influenced, as we know, by motivation, right? So what are people actually held accountable for? We hear a lot in policing that officers feel like they're being asked to do a lot of things that are outside the scope of their core jobs, things that aren't part of how they're evaluated and things that aren't factored into promotion decisions. Recognition and rewards also play a role here. So these can be formal or informal things, and they can be external or internal. So sometimes motivation comes from, just the knowledge of knowing that you've helped someone in the community and feeling good about what you've done. So with that framework in mind, I now want to shift to briefly talking about a couple of RTI projects that we have that address these topics. First is our NIJ project on how to recruit more women into policing. So why do we need more women in policing in the first place? I know a lot of you are familiar with this issue, but just to reiterate, research has shown that women generally demonstrate competencies that are important for effective policing, especially in the current context. They've been shown to restore trust in the police, use less force when policing, and facilitate higher reporting and clearance rates for certain kinds of cases like rape cases. And it's also just important that agencies reflect the demographics of the communities they serve. Of course, recruiting in policing is a challenge across the board right now. Recruiting women isn't the only issue, but agencies have had the most trouble historically recruiting women. So over the last couple of decades, recruiting and hiring of racial minorities, for example, has steadily increased, but the percentage of women in policing has plateaued at about 12%, and it's hardly changed over the last 30 to 40 years. So the first phase of the project that we're conducting is to do a scan of what different types of agencies do to recruit women and recruit in general. My project team has done this really comprehensive coding process of all the recruiting and hiring materials that agencies have online on their websites and social media pages. And we've also coded some of their more general web content, not just the recruiting materials, to look at things like how policing strategies are described, how community engagement is described, and how they depict officers in photos and videos. And what we're finding is, there really needs to be an alignment between all these different components of messaging, right? So there are some agencies that have these great statements about their commitment to diversity and community engagement. But then if you look at the pictures and videos on their websites, sometimes it's all white men, or it's only videos related to physical training or weapons training. And this can really be confusing, I think, to some applicants about what the agency actually prioritizes, and it may make some people wonder, how sincere some of these communications are, right? Do you have a statement about commitment to women or diversity because you feel like you have to, or you think it's the right thing to do, or is it really reflective of the agency's culture? We've also heard anecdotally that a lot of the women who are in policing got involved through personal connections. Someone in their family or friend circle was an officer and talked to them about it and got them interested. And that's a perfectly good and effective strategy and not one that needs to stop. But if agencies want to, have a broader applicant pool and increase the diversity of their applicant pool, they're going to have to do things differently. And finally, we acknowledge that real change is hard. It takes dedication of time and resources, which we know are scarce. But part of the reason why I'm so excited about this study is that later phases of this project, including a lab and field study, are going to help us really identify the most effective strategies for recruiting women. And this should help agencies identify really where to focus their resources to get the best return. So I'm hoping maybe next year I will be back talking about this project and have even more results to report. Switching gears a little bit, we have another NIJ study that focuses on understanding work-related stress among medico-legal death investigators. The reason I wanted to talk about this study as part of this panel is because the main focus of this work is not on community engagement. It's about understanding and alleviating stress in this workforce that really has a lot of challenges. But in conducting focus groups to inform the development of our national survey for this study, we learned that MDIs view their work in maybe different ways than we originally thought, and they really have a major role in supporting the communities they serve. For example, they're often the ones who give death notifications to family members, and they often provide a lot of emotional support in these cases. So I bring that up to demonstrate that there are multiple ways that we need to be thinking about community engagement. There are formal initiatives, but also community engagement through regular interactions that people have in the course of their everyday work. And what that engagement looks like depends on a lot of factors, including work-related stress and health risks, the extent to which people understand what's expected of them, and the support and resources provided to them. So we heard a lot of discussion about MDI struggling to navigate their work, in the context of COVID, and some of these challenges are similar to what we've heard from law enforcement too, right? So when something major like this happens, like a global pandemic, and you're also worried about your own exposure, trying to take care of your family, you may not have sufficient PPE, you're not sure what procedures you're supposed to be following. All of that will affect how you're able to show up and engage with community members. So I think that agencies, have really been trying their best to navigate through very uncertain times, but it's just a good reminder that, taking care of your own employees has a direct impact on community engagement, and that can take a lot of different forms. So finally, we have a project, I know this has been talked about earlier in today's sessions, through Arnold Ventures, the Carolina Cohort Initiative. And the purpose of this is to implement and evaluate interventions that aim to better align law enforcement responses and resources with community needs in these 7 cities in North and South Carolina. And as part of this, we've begun conducting focus groups to understand officers' perceptions of the various calls for service they handle, especially as was mentioned earlier, as they relate to crisis and mental illness. So what we've been hearing is that, officers view responding to these kinds of calls really as an opportunity to build trust and rapport with the public. But their ability to help community members in crisis depends on a number of factors, including, competing demands and priorities, which everyone knows, are really salient. In other words, not having enough time to respond to these calls effectively, the amount and type of training that they've received, and also career stage. So we've heard that, sometimes becoming comfortable with handling these calls just comes with practice. Having more time on these kinds of cases, it leads to becoming more familiar with the kinds of resources and community supports available, and you just get more comfortable with handling these difficult issues. We also heard that it would be helpful if officers received more information about what happened to the people that they helped on these mental health calls. And this taps into that motivation piece that I talked about earlier, right? It's different if you help someone, they're referred to treatment, and then you actually get some follow-up information about how that situation was resolved. That's a lot more motivating, for future interactions than if you respond to these calls and they kind of just vanish into the void and you never get any information afterwards. So I bring this up just to show that, there are a lot of different contextual factors at play that affect community engagement. And this particular study is resulting in some specific recommendations to city council members in these cities to address some of these challenges. So I'm really excited for what's going to develop there. So to wrap up, I just want to reiterate that, there are a few key factors that affect successful community engagement, right? So there's the job itself, employees' knowledge, skills, and abilities, both at hire and those acquired through training, and also motivation. And then, of course, community engagement is a two-way street, and it depends on community members' perceptions of police, the history of police-community interactions, and a lot of other factors on that side as well. And I think, one of the really hopeful things about all of the sessions today is I think we all acknowledge it's not easy to build trust, but I do believe that both law enforcement and communities want change. And I'm just really excited about the research that we and all of you are doing to figure out how to do that. So please feel free to contact me with any questions about the work RTI is doing in this space. And with that, I will turn it back over to Crystal and our great panelists.
Sure. Next up, we're going to hear from Eric Hutchison.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, and are you able to see my slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Thank you very much. First off, thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm thrilled to be here. A couple of things that I've heard that resonate with the information that I want to talk about is, first off, Dr. Banks' opening statements about the importance of data-driven evidence-based solutions. I'll be talking a little bit about the importance of evidence-based in this discussion about selection, and that also includes the principles for the validation and use of personnel selection procedures. So, making sure that a selection process is validated is first and foremost the most important before considering bringing in any additional raters or participants in that process. As Trevor mentioned, engaging the community really needs to be a structured process before inviting them in, knowing exactly what those responsibilities are going to be. So I'll be continuing both of those topics throughout the slides today. So a little bit of background on this. This is the City of Columbus here. This is actually, I helped with their community evaluator program launch in 2017. And I assisted with that both in 17, 18, and 19. I conducted extensive research the first year of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that today. And then most recently, working with some researchers from RTI, we extended that research to do a pre-test and post-test with participants this year in 2020. So I'm excited to share some more information about that. So some of the best practices and critical learnings that are associated with community involvement in police selection. I've talked to other IO psychologists. I've been part of a couple of conferences where I've presented the initial findings from Columbus's introduction to the community evaluator program. And there isn't a standard way of doing this. So several practitioners that I've talked with and other researchers have shared that they've assisted public sector divisions with responding to the call to engage the community, but then when that happens, they run into some roadblocks or they stumble, right? So what are some of the things that have happened? A lack of awareness about how the community is going to be involved. So really defining that role and determining which part of the multiple hurdle selection process is the community going to be engaged in. Many cities will invite community members to observe interviews or it be part of a panel, but they really don't have a stakeholder vote. That was one of the unique things about the City of Columbus, is that they invited community members to apply to be a community evaluator. They interviewed them, they put them through training, they had them do a ride along with a police officer. They also did a similar ride along with fire, and they also spent a full day at both academies, and then they participated in both the police and fire selection process. The part of the process that they were engaged in was being raters on a panel for participants who engaged in a video-based situational judgment test. So what that means is candidates were shown a scenario and they responded in the first person as though they were engaging with the person on the screen. Those responses were recorded and then later evaluated on two criteria: problem-solving skills as well as interpersonal skills, using a structured rating scale. So from the beginning to the end, the evaluators were trained, they were aware of the job, they understood what they were evaluating, they knew how to rate, and they were also aware of several different types of bias that can occur during a rating process. So thinking about some of the challenges that the City of Columbus, as well as other communities, have run into is the pushback. I mean, you're getting internal pushback from Uniform, wondering, wait a minute, you're bringing somebody off the street to evaluate whether somebody is qualified to become an officer or a firefighter? That doesn't sound right. So helping to alleviate that concern by discussing the structured way in which this is going to be done certainly helps with the perception. You also get pushback from the community. How are you choosing these individuals? What are the qualifications? Are you trying to appease a certain section of the community? There isn't a lot of faith when it comes to saying, hey, yeah, we want you to be involved, we want you to participate. Like there's a lot of uncertainty there from the community members as to what the true motivation is. And then also during the engagement. So if a community evaluator is on a panel with other uniform raters, making sure that there is that dynamic and that rater agreement, that there's an opportunity for them to discuss their perspectives, and that there's a moderator in the room to ensure that not only are bias being addressed, but that also everybody's having an opportunity to voice their opinion. So those are some of the best practices and critical learnings. So back to the data, right? So measuring the effect. What difference did it make when the city of Columbus brought people in to participate in this process? So I examined rater agreement over 3 years. So previous years, there were 2 uniforms and a member of the civil service team on each rating panel. In 17, that civil service person was swapped out with a community member. Then the civil service person was the moderator in the room. So I looked at rater agreement. Did that affect things? Assessment and selection outcomes. Did gender, race, ethnicity, or method of rating, presence or absence of the community evaluator, were any of those a predictor of performance on the test results? And then did the results of the test predict performance in the academy? So I was thrilled to see that there was statistical significance in all 3 years with rater agreement. There was also consistency with selection outcomes. So there were not any indicators of adverse impact. There were not any indicators of subgroup differences as a predictor of performance. One method of concern, or one point of concern, is that from a validity perspective, this video-based test did not predict performance or graduation from the academy. However, all of the scenarios in the test were a realistic job review of what an officer would be encountering because it linked back to a job analysis. So again, a focus on evidence-based solutions. That job analysis was that evidence that we need when constructing an assessment for selection. So community evaluator perceptions was not something that was measured in the initial study. However, through public data request, we submitted a request to have the information for those individuals chosen to be community evaluators in 2020. We used 2 scales. We used the perception of police scale, which is Nadal and Davidoff. And then working with Jen Rainier and Tom Scott at RTI, we also created some items for perceptions of police selection. So the bars in red are the pre-test. There was a lot of neutral feeling around things such as police officers protect me, I like the police provide safety, the police are helpful, and then the police are reliable, as well as police officers care about my community. We did see a shift in agreement, pre-test, post-test. We had all 5 evaluators present the first or participate the first time, only 4 the second time. While this certainly isn't, there's not statistical probability here at all with a sample of 5. This is a great indicator that there is a shift, that a program like this could be a change agent in the community, right? The perceptions about how these individuals felt about the police changed as a result of participating in this program. We also created some open-ended questions as part of this survey. So in the beginning, the perspective of the police were, there was a perception that many police officers have a mission of protecting and serving. Some of the respondents said they don't necessarily believe that that's consistent for all. They didn't have a very strong perspective or awareness of the selection process, and they all had different reasons that they shared for participating in the initiative. At the end, though, the perspective of the police did change. They did feel that the police that they worked with that week and a half as they were part of the selection panels were some of the best that Columbus had to offer. They felt that they had open and honest dialogue with them about issues in the community and their perspectives, and that the police officers were engaging and answered the questions that the community members had. They did feel that the selection process was fair. However, all of the participants were consistent in their post responses that they didn't feel that there was a way to measure implicit bias among candidates. So, back to the conversation earlier about training and implicit bias awareness, if that's something that we could identify earlier on in the selection process, that could help mitigate that risk later on or make that training less complicated. 75% of the respondents felt that the experience was great and that the evaluation of the selection process was excellent. So they were great learnings. And again, this is just a very small indicator that this in fact is an opportunity to engage the community and help create more awareness and improve that perception. So I do have some questions for discussion to consider. If anybody would like to share their answer to that or use that for our dialogue later on, I'm welcome to that. You can also feel free to reach out to me at any time. My contact information is on this slide, as well as I believe it's in my profile. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Commander Warwick to unmute at this time.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Warwick. I'm the Commander of Operations for the Green Bay Police Department. Just truly an honor to be part of this conversation, to really learn. And when I got to, sat through each of your presentation, a lot of the topics that I want to talk about, and they gave me 5 minutes to talk, and I feel like I could talk for hours on this topic, is about community engagement and the role it has in the police department. I think the path for policing going forward, no matter what agency you're in, evolves around the community. In Green Bay here, we are very open with the community and very transparent. And we always say that we're working for them, not with them. And we embrace that by the community engagement, by the community meetings that we have, by the listening sessions, and I could go on, but it evolves around three topics. And as cops, and it's hard presenting to other cops, and people are very critical, and cops are even more critical. But the takeaways that we have, and we can go to the next slide here. The takeaways that we have that our, the department's community engagement focuses on respect, trust, and legitimacy. And I know someone earlier in the presentations here talked about that, and not a lot of people forget about. I should say that a lot of people forget about legitimacy, and how vital that is. So as a department, we constantly have to earn respect. We have a thing in Green Bay called the Respect Initiative, and it's based on the book on the power of unconditional respect. It's a great read. It's a short read by Jim Caldwell and Chip Huth, police officers in Kansas City. I highly recommend that book to put on your reading list for your supervisors or for your staff, because it really it talks about that every person has respect automatically. When I started policing, it was more of like respect is earned, not given. This model flips it, and it says, no, everybody's got respect, and you're going to start that contact out that way. And I hope and I pray that every police officer nationwide embraces that model. Now, when you look at the news, sometimes we falter a little bit, but we're human, we make mistakes. So when we take that respect initiative and we take the training that we provided, and we work on our community engagement, we're focusing on those three topics: respect, trust, and legitimacy. And that evolves around those three topics. For the presenter, could you go to the next slide, please, in the PowerPoint? Thank you. So keep in mind, in Green Bay, we're a small town. When you think about, being an NFL city and everybody thinks that Green Bay is this huge city, we're a town of 100,000, maybe 400,000 if you include all the surrounding suburbs. So when you compare it to some of the jurisdictions you're living in, we're comparatively a small city. And that being said, everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows someone who knows someone. And when things happen, people want to be heard. People have a voice, and that was very apparent in 2020. All the same problems the big cities had, we had as well. But our community engagement efforts got us through that, and it evolved around the Trust and Respect Initiative that we consistently push, and that equated to legitimacy in the community. But it's important that in Green Bay, that we know the communities within the communities. Each one of you, just rhetorically speaking, everybody knows the communities within the communities. And what I mean by that is the Black community, the Hispanic community, the Somali community, the Hmong community, the Native American community, the LGBTQ community. It's imperative that we know the stakeholders in each of those communities, those informal grassroots leaders that can help you through the problems that you're facing. so valuable in 2020. Regardless of the situation, whatever the problem is, someone was always there to stand with you. And it's important, and in Green Bay, we've embraced this, that we have to continually engage and you have to develop these relationships. And, relationships and partnerships, I think sometimes are just talked about to nausea about in policing, but they're so important because it equates back to the community engagement. And that's how you develop the respect, trust, and legitimacy. But knowing all the communities within the communities in Green Bay, if I could give you some takeaways for you to copy and replicate, and I'd be more than willing to tell any law enforcement agency what we do so that they can do the same thing in their jurisdictions. Hopefully they'll achieve the same results that it did here in Green Bay. But we've partnered with the Boys and Girls Club, with the Cal Ripken Foundation. So if you've got a Boys and Girls Club in your jurisdiction, Cal Ripken, though he's a baseball player, he appeals to all sports and uses the club to really bridge and build leaders, our seeds, our future leaders, our kids in our community. And we partnered with the club to have police officers be an integral part of that program. We've got initiatives in the community where we give out blessing bags at Christmas time. We give out food baskets during Thanksgiving time, all by charitable donors. I guarantee a lot of municipal budgets don't have money for stuff like this, but having those partnerships and relationships in the community, people are very giving. And it is very crucial to your efforts to really engage the community because, budgets are tight. There's no overtime, there's no money for stuff like this, but it's important. But, as I wrap this up, because I don't want to speak beyond my 5 minutes, it's important to know all the communities within the communities and then develop relationships and have community events within those communities. So, for the Hispanic community, there's a fairly large Hispanic community in Green Bay. And in 2016, when the former president took office, everybody thought they were being deported. And we had several community meetings to talk about how the role of local law enforcement is not the role of immigration or ICE. So a lot of this community engagement, equates to reducing fear, the anxiety, and most importantly, the perception of what's going on in the neighborhoods. That's just one example for the Hispanic community. For the Somali community, I encourage you to really develop the relationship with the imam. The imam is the leader of this Islamic church. What great people they're just salt of the earth type people. And they're living in your communities and they want to have that relationship with you. We have some outreach organizations here in Green Bay, and we work with them to deliver our message, to deliver a community-based message from community-based people that believe, trust, and respect us. And that's what gets us through these problems. And we work with them to ensure that do that. The Black community, we work with them, with the Black Lives United, and these outreach centers, these resource centers, to be part of the conversations. We understand that there is a lot of angst against law enforcement, antitrust, and the reasons why that it occurs. Everybody can answer that question. But all the social media, the banter, we try to dispel. Now, sometimes it's an uphill battle, but we're always part of that conversation, and that's what's most important here. So I'll stand for questions. I appreciate being part of this conversation. And again, if anybody has any questions about the outreach the Green Bay Police Department does, we can talk offline. I can give you everything I have, and I can give you the framework, and hopefully it achieves the same results that it did here in Green Bay.
Thank you, Commander. I'd like to invite Sergeant Todd at this time to provide a brief introduction and talk to us about police recruits.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
That's great. All right. So I'm Sergeant Todd with the Greensboro Police Department. I've been here 18 years. I handle not only our recruiting process, but our background investigation process. And those things really do live pretty well together. The question that was posed to me was, could I speak to the qualities that we look for in an applicant, and has that changed over time? So I think to start that conversation, you have to look at what the process looks like to get the job of being a police officer. And I don't know if that was covered in anything earlier, but it does change from state to state. So I'll read out ours. And the fact of the matter is we sit 2 academies a year. We get about 700 applications for those academies. So in total, we see about 1,400 applications per year. Those academies are 6 months long. So our recruits are always in training. Academic testing is the first phase. They do physical fitness testing, 4 psychological assessments, an extensive criminal and personal background investigation, as well as a work history investigation. They then have to be chosen by our selection committee, made of sworn committee members, non-sworn committee members, and civilian members. They then go on to another psychological examination. They have a polygraph exam and then medical and drug testing. On average, it takes anywhere from about 2 to 6 months to sit a recruit once they start the application process. And we end up choosing a little less than 5% of all those folks that apply. Only about 85% of the people that we even sit in the academy will make it out of the academy. It's 6 months long. It's an intense paramilitary training program. Then they have 14 weeks of field training, and about 90% of those folks make it out of field training. So all that is to say, it is an extremely difficult job to get. I like to say that I think we have the hardest job to get in the city of Greensboro, and we're awfully proud of the folks that make it through all of that. So one of the many challenges in being a police recruiter is attracting applicants who have a high chance of success in a career and have a high chance of success in getting through all of those challenges. So the first answer to the question is there are state standards. They have to be at least 21 years of age, have a high school diploma, a clean criminal history, a clean drug history, that they can meet the physical fitness standards that are required by the job. But there's obviously other things that we would really love to attract. We always like when people have strong physical fitness, a good academic acumen, have made good, mature life choices, and quite frankly, have to be honest about absolutely everything throughout the entire process. And if you can make it through all that, then you too can be paid $38,987 a year to start your salary with us. So it is very, very difficult to recruit for that job. And that being said, we managed to do it again and again. I am often very impressed by the courage and compassion of the people that we attract. And there's a lot of altruism that goes into that. The next part of that question was really, what are some of the things I've noticed that are strong predictors for success? And I try to key into some things that wouldn't be predictable. And so one of the things is that literally every single person I recruit, I text them. I have their number in my phone. I don't do business cards. I like to text them and they like to text back because it is 2021. And so I will text with them, and you can often see when they text back quickly that they are engaged in the process. This is something they want to be a part of. And I see that as a really strong predictor of success with them making it through. By who the selection committee chooses, it's almost batting 1,000 on the people that were quick to text back and want to be a part of the process. So I think some of the other predictors for success have stayed the same. I mean, one of the parts of that question is what's been different and what's stayed the same. A lot of the stuff has stayed the same since I got this job, and probably has stayed the same over the last 30 years. But I think there's some things that are a little different. So one of the things that's the same is drug use is now a little more accepted than it was. I remember many, many decades ago, whenever having any drug use at all was an automatic disqualifier for a lot of processes. And now that drug culture is a little more common. I think that I've seen a lot of agencies relax their drug use policy, and we've honestly gotten quite a few great applicants who may have been disqualified in the past. Social engagement has certainly changed tremendously, especially when you talk to field training officers. The number of people who are able to socially engage and are very fluid in their social engagement is a lot lower. Getting them to engage with people that aren't like them has been a challenge a lot of times with our field training officers. So you can tell a lot of times during the recruitment process who does that really well, who interviews well. The general diversity of applicants, but I think one of the major changes in that area is the general age. I think if you'd have looked back 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't see many 40-year-olds, certainly not many 50-year-olds applying for this job. But we haven't had a process since I've been in this unit where we haven't sat multiple 40-year-olds in police academies. So I think you're seeing older applicants for this job interested in getting the job. And the last part of some things that have changed is certainly social media. It has given us a huge amount of insight into an applicant's background. When they come in and apply for our job, they have to make available their social media accounts, and we have access to those. And it tells us certainly that there are a lot of virtues and flaws with some of the folks applying. So that's been a major change that's been an advantage for us. We've been able to use social media to conduct thorough background investigations for people that are going to be successful in a career.
Thanks, Sergeant Todd.
Yeah.
Next, we'll hear from Mimi Stiles about utilizing data as a community partner and holding departments accountable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this time. I'm going to go ahead and present. And let me know if you can see my screen okay. Does that work for you?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So first, let me just say that evidence-based policing has allowed a unique space for community members to become active partners in the process of this idea of community policing in science. And so what we've learned is that by collecting data, by applying research, by rethinking old ways of doing things with your community, and when I think of community, everyone is a part of that in some way or another, new insights can be created to kind of help to rewrite the narrative. And so as I kind of share with you guys a solution more so, this is kind of more of like an idea that you can bring to the table in your own communities or in your own department. Think about this, share data, that's number one. You don't know how many times, like just as a data activist, I've had to pound on doors in order to just get some data. Secondly, is to partner with non-traditional research partners and people and validate their experience and their space in that place. Again, local HBCUs have incredible thinkers. People like me, I'm a Black woman that has started this amazing research and public education organization that I'm going to tell you about right now. And we are willing to partner and support. And so at Measure, our target problem, I always talk about our problem, but it's more of an opportunity, is that lived experience data and quantitative data about complex social problems impacting people of color are not used effectively for change. And this is due mainly to several different reasons, but the ones that we tackle are, due to historical and structural racism through a lack of the accessibility of evaluation and equitable data tools, and then also due to the lack of village support. And so what we do at Measure are the way that we're working to solve this problem is that we provide free data support to Black and Brown-led organizations. So that's in many cases in partnership. And so our evaluation tools have gone through an extensive community-led, and a lot of times we talk about community-led versus community-based, a very extensive community-led process to ensure that we're authentically representing people in our work. We routinely evaluate our tools and our processes to make sure that our work is truly anti-racist. And that's just something that we do to reflect on our own, on what we bring to the table. And so what you see here are 4 of our evaluation tools that we use with our clients and our community members, and what they receive when they register for our support. So again, this is something that we do as, with community members. Black and Brown-led organizations get this service for free from Measure. We ask organizations that have the economic means to provide funding so that we're able to do this for free for our clients. At the end of the day, without an equitable framework that's built into our tools, built into public administration tools, built into models, built into the way that we go about hiring, right? We risk the continual perpetuation of racism in our largest institutions and our services in America. We realized this very early on at Measure, and so that's why we really developed this grassroots organization. And so with, one thing led to another. It really started off with just this idea of assessing community policing. And if we're going to say we're making community policing a priority, Measure asked the question very early on, how are we assessing community policing? How are you measuring it? What are the key performance indicators that say that community policing is actually a priority? And so the CARE model was one that we really it's really our bread and butter. I guess, when we bring communities together. They leave out with a community mobilization plan. They leave out with a historical timeline to really understand and center on how injustice has shown up because of institutional racism or structural racism or internalized racism and so forth within their communities. And they also come out with success metrics, and they come out with a budget in order to actually go do the work. A lot of times community members are tapped on the shoulder. Hey, you guys, come on and join, come and join this conversation, but we're not giving the financial means to even go do that work or to drive to get to the place that you want us to sit and listen on the conversation. And so the care model is, I'll kind of quickly talk about this here. It's a model that that's in a process of working in active partnership with communities to develop solutions to these complex social problems. Short-term solutions, to be honest. I mean, and so each letter represents a component of the community mobilization process that organizations and institutions will go through as they partner with their communities to address these problems. So it provides a means of increasing really deep, meaningful engagement. That way we are minimizing the potential trauma or the re-traumatization of the community. So far, so often communities, and especially now, are feeling like we are a petri dish, researched and researched and researched without even understanding the theological frameworks that those that are coming into our communities are using to assess our experience. And so we're really thinking through ways, how can you transfer and redistribute power of research and understanding and evaluation back to communities. So C is community is involved from the very beginning, meaning that communities even develop their own surveys. We are our own data collectors. We analyze the data and so forth. And it's from the very beginning. A, we advocate with the community to address disparities. So it's not just research, it's like research to local action. What are we going to do about this black paper? We call it black papers. Of course, the terminology is white paper, but we call it black paper. What are we going to do with this information after we collect it and understand it? And then R, generate solutions that strengthen community resilience. E, use evidence data for data-informed decisions. And so each time we use this care model, we really dedicate time to its completion. And you can see down there, and I'm not going to go through all the phases, but you can see down there that it's a very strategically aligned process that's not just get in there, ask a few questions, and get out. And so what has been the results of the care model? Well, there's been a lot, right? Some of them, just off the top of my head, has been a community created idea to start a equity commission, within Pflugerville, Texas. Now, most people are probably like, where's Pflugerville? Well, it's right outside of Austin, let's put it that way. So now they have an actual commission of community members from all walks of life that are intentionally rooting out disproportionality within their city. And that all came from the care model. What also came from the care model was was a project called the Innocence Initiative, and it's really attacking adultification bias. So when we talked about the young girl that was pepper sprayed in the back of a cop car, we have to understand that during that exchange, the young girl was pleading for her dad, and she was also told by the police officer, "You're acting like a child." And she responded appropriately. She said, "What? I am a child." And so the idea of adultification bias is the way that we look at little girls. And especially for us, it's looking at little Black girls as less innocent. And it's been studied and researched, and we have the data to back it up. We actually are in partnership right now with Georgetown University and unpacking this and making some very strong solutions within our own community to address and to eliminate adultification bias. And that came from the care model. It came from an active partnership with police in our communities, big mama down the street, youth, college students, social scientists, nerds like me, coming together to do this work very intentionally for the good of our community. And so what else has come from the CARE model? Well, we have this really great conference that again started with just this type of deep thinking, collaborative thinking, community-led thinking that's led to the Big Data Community Policing Conference. And so what you're seeing here are pictures of our 5th conference that was held in San Diego at the top of last year, January of last year, in partnership with the University of San Diego. And so this conference is really about elevating, again, lived experience data, quantitative data. How do you take all this information and all the data that you're collecting within the police department and actively share it with your community so that you can develop actionable solutions? Well, number one is that you have to have a forum. You have to create a space. And so this is an intentionally created space where activists, researchers, academics are able to provide training to police officers as well as community members. And so what that looked like was at our last one, we had about 225 attendees in San Diego, about 42 different cities represented. We also were able to provide 540 training hours. And so that's really our ability to connect with the credentialing entity within different cities to provide those hours to police officers. So it's all about, for us, it's all about deep thinking, and it's all about making sure that community members are not just invited to the table, but they're truly leading the discussion.
All right, thank you. And then we'll hear from Dr. Boyd about incorporating cultural competencies into training and community programming.
Thank you very much. And first of all, to meet me, I've actually been to Pflugerville. I've been shopping in Pflugerville and Round Rock, so that's another story. I know the area well. But let's talk about policing and cultural competency. So let's take a step back. And it was said earlier that in order to be a police officer, you have to have either a GED or a high school diploma and reach 21 years of age. Well, some would say, that's a pretty low bar. When I graduated the academy, I had already gone through college and, was a little bit older. But we also want to understand that the average adult brain doesn't stop developing until 25 or 26, but yet we still give 21 and 22-year-olds badges and guns and allow them to make life or death decisions. I'm not faulting them for this. I'm just saying that there needs to be another level of training that happens. In typical police academies, for instance, here in Connecticut, we have 905 hours of training. And depending on the jurisdiction, between 80 and 100 hours of firearm, about 40 hours are defensive driving, another 25 to 30 hours for defensive tactics, 4 hours for community relations. So it's not surprising that we see across the country in policing that people, when push comes to shove, default to the one thing that they're trained on the most. They tend to go to the firearm because that's what they do. A lot of police departments now are understanding that. And when we talk about reimagining policing, I'd like to push it a step further. I'd like to reimagine training, because we could argue that we've been doing training the same way in this country for 108, 110 years without a whole lot of variation. It's the us versus them scenario. But statistically, last year was among the safest year for police. We have to go back almost to the Nixon administration to find lower numbers of police officers feloniously shot and killed in the line of duty. What we do have is more police officers dying from suicide than from homicide. So we have to protect the people that protect us. But when we go into training, and I do between 250 and 300 hours of training in a non-COVID year of training police officers across the country. And roughly that's equivalent to running a 5 or 6 week police academy. So in order to get this done, we bring a lot of community members and police officers together in the same room, because it's really important that police officers understand the lived experience of those that they're policing. But it's equally as important for community members to understand the really hard and complex job that police officers have. So if we can bring both groups together and give them a few hours of training together so they can see each other's perspectives, then that's a pathway forward. One of the ways that we do that in our training, there's a lot of scenarios and there's a lot of role play. And when we do role play scenarios, we have the citizen act in the role as the police officer, and we have the officer act as the role of the citizen. And then at each touch point, we stop them and we unpack that. Why did you do this? What were you thinking? What were you seeing? Because I need citizens to understand what police officers are typically going through. And we control this. We control the scenarios and we add different things to it as we're going, just so they can understand. Getting police officers and citizens to understand the same scenarios is really helpful. But again, when I took over the Center for Advanced Policing here at the University of New Haven, they said we're going to build a better cop. And to me, that sounded like some 1990s RoboCop thing that had been passed. So I said, instead of just building a better cop, why don't we take a holistic approach to the level of training that we're doing? Why don't we build a better person and usher them into policing? And I spend a lot of time at historically minority serving institutions. I spend a lot of time at HBCUs trying to get young Black and brown people into policing. And I'm telling them it's a fantastic career opportunity. Policing is not a job, it's a career opportunity for the right person. So we need to let them understand some of the things that are going on. But when we do the process, this holistic process of training, there are 4 steps that we do. One is increasing levels of empathy. 2, increasing levels of compassion. 3, increasing communication skills. And 4, increasing critical thinking skills. If we can give those 4 things to people on the street, regardless of what the job is, you're likely to be more successful at the job. And unfortunately, in policing, like many other jobs, people act on emotion. So if we can increase critical thinking skills and get them beyond the emotion to see real issues, we want them to be problem solvers, because a good police officer solves problems before they become crimes. A lot of what we were hearing is happening up in Green Bay. There's a lot of communities that are doing things like this, which is the direction to go. The pathway forward, every time I walk into an agency, and I do a lot of assessments of police agencies, the first thing they do, as soon as I walk in, somebody on the command staff will tell me that somebody has come in and reevaluated their policies and procedures and decided that they're not biased. They're not racially biased. Okay, I'll bite. So if your policies and procedures are not racially biased, and yet you still have significant problems with people in the community, particularly people of color, what is it then? There's only 3 options. One is your policy, what you're supposed to do. Number 2 is your procedure, the way you actually do it. Or 3 is your practice, what you do when nobody else is looking. So if your policies and procedures are good, we need to take a look at the practices, what actually happens, because there's a lot of folks that say, particularly FTOs, because I spent 5 years as a field training officer, and they'll say, I know what they taught you in the academy. Let me tell you what's going on in the street with these people. And unfortunately, in policing across the country, there's still the us versus them scenario. And the more you bring the us's and the thems together in the same room to realize that people have the same objective. Everybody wants the American dream. Everyone wants to be safe. We do this by reimagining training, mimicking good behavior, role plays, scenarios, getting involved, hands-on activities, citizens and communities together. Northeastern University in Boston is running a police academy now for themselves. It's a supplemental academy for the city of Boston, and it's a primary academy for the city of Cambridge. Every single Friday for the whole 6-month academy, every Friday they have a half a day. The second half of the day, they reassign these cadets to the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, homeless shelters, battered women's shelters, and they spend the second half of the day working in these shelters, because you want to get them to understand the people that they're going to be working with. You don't want them, the first time they see some of these populations, to be in an enforcement way. So the more you can get them in touch with these people, the more they get to understand each other, the better ultimately it's going to be. The goals and objectives for reimagined training: improve communication, particularly crisis intervention skills. Because, and the officers can tell you, when people call 911, it's not because they have way too much barbecue. Can you send some officers to come over and take some off of our hand? People call 911 when things are out of their control, when they can't handle what's going on. So by definition, in policing, it's about crisis intervention. And number two, we have to provide specific training skills on how to overcome communication barriers, particularly people with different backgrounds, different religions, different languages, different cultures. The more we interact with these people in non-enforcement ways, the easier it's going to be. We also have to develop cultural competence and do it over and over and over and over again. It's not enough just to get 4 hours of cultural competence in the academy. It needs to be part of your in-service training, not just once a year, but we need to run that out quarterly. Increase community dialogue, increase engagement. And as much as I hated that we went community policing right after I became a solo patrol unit, getting me out of the car, talking to members of the community, made me less fearful of the people that I was policing. So that engagement is really, really important. And then repeat that over and over and over again. And the last point I make, we spend a lot of time referring to the job of policing as law enforcement. Statistically, enforcing criminal laws as it applies to index crime is only about 20% of what police do around the country. Between 55 and 60% of what the police do is actually service and administrative stuff. So if you look at the sleeve, it doesn't say city law enforcement, it says policing. So if we change the narrative, if we do a paradigm shift and stop telling people you're a reactive law enforcer and let them know that you're actually a proactive policing officer, that's one way to move forward and build bridges with the community. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now open up the floor for some questions. We've definitely heard some reoccurring themes from all of our panelists on this roundtable. I'd like to open up this Q&A session with Sergeant Todd. And if you could talk with us a little bit about some ways that research and data can be used to inform police recruiting and hiring practices, especially as we're talking about the importance of building community trust.
I'll tell you, one of the things that I thought when I saw that question that would certainly help us as creating a predictor for success through police academies and through a career would be to look at officers who've retired from the job. This isn't a 10-year stint. It's not a 4-year term of service. For most cities in America, it's 20, 25, or 30 years of doing this job. And I think when you look at the number of people who make it 10 years in the career, most academy classes that I see are drop off by half. When you look at most academy classes that make it 25, 20, 30 years, you look at maybe a quarter of those people. So if those people are your most successful police officers, the ones that weathered this career for decades, 2 and 3 decades at a time, I would love to see research done on those men and women who survived this career and all it entails for 2 and 3 decades. And not necessarily the young people who are trying to get into the job or the new applicants, but what is it that you saw as a commonality in those folks over the course of the past 2-3 decades? So I'd like to see research done on people who are about to retire or who just retired from this career. What did we see as a common trait between them?
Thank you. Did someone have some, did I hear another voice? Okay. Dr. Boyd, can you talk to us a little bit about how an agency can ensure that community-based programs are culturally competent, and then what the research is telling us about how to best implement and sustain those community-based programs?
The short answer is engaging the community in the program implementation. When you start off with your programming, it's like we do policing to the community and not with the community. And the analogy that I give is that the history of the jungle is written from the perspective of the hunter. The lion doesn't get to tell his story because the lion is captured or shot, or the lion has the hunter kneeling on his neck for 9 minutes. So if we acknowledge that point, what would happen if we study policing from the perspective of the community? Bringing community members in at the beginning of these programs, because a lot of community people will know what to do for their communities. And unfortunately for policing, certainly in a lot of major cities, there are outsiders coming into the city doing policing. So the thing that the police have to do is include community members in the beginning. And what we do is a lot of times we just automatically go to the Black church and say, well, those are the people that we want to bring in. My suggestion is, instead of just going there, go to the barbershops and go to the place where other people are that are not just part of that community. Go to people that are justice involved. Go to people that at some point were involved in the system and have them be part of the solution. Because the cultural competence happens when people that are in it are part of the solution.
Thank you. Sergeant Todd, we actually have a question in the Q&A pod. Would you be willing to give your opinion or experience on veteran hiring practices? And I'll also go ahead and open that question up to the rest of our panelists if anyone has anything to add.
Sure, yeah. So if by what I'm understanding that is military veterans, and that is traditionally very successful. One of the, obviously after my long monologue about all the stuff you have to go do to get through the job, you need a sense of discipline and stick-to-itness to get through all of it. And very frequently, military veterans have that. They've been asked to do some often very ridiculous things throughout their careers. So when we ask them to show up for their third meeting or to come in next Friday because we need them here for something, they're very acquiescent to come and just knock it out, come take care of it. So they're often very successful in our application processes. And just because I think they've got the wherewithal to say, you can ask me to do something ridiculous, often this job does, and they'll come and get it done. So they've got the right attitude, I think.
Thank you. Dr. Hutchison, this next question is for you. What would you say are the most important considerations for cities that are interested in implementing a community evaluator program?
It would be, what is the recruitment process for the community members? Is that a fair representation of the community? What is going to be the role and responsibility for that community member? And are they aware of that responsibility prior to starting the process? And then, making sure that that process and that involvement is structured, that there's training on awareness of the job, as well as on the assessment method that they're participating in, and aware of that type of rating bias. So it really is from a beginning to end assessment, selection, training process. Another important consideration is the confidentiality piece, because the individuals will have access to the test materials. And so that's something else to keep in mind in the selection process, especially if those materials are used year over year.
Have there been any outcomes from your work so far that you weren't expecting to see, whether positive or not so positive?
Sure. The very first year, there was some resentment from Uniform about this process, because, as I mentioned in the presentation, if it's not clearly explained what we're doing, how we're doing it, there's that lack of awareness, and that vulnerability is, what is somebody who is a member, somebody off the street, how are they rating candidates, right? How are they qualified to do that? So, not having them included in that process and having that buy-in before starting it definitely can create a rift. now that this has been going on a couple of years, I don't think that is that much of an issue anymore, but it was confusing in the beginning. Also from the perspective of the community, there were people that were responding in comments to news reports and news articles about the community evaluator initiative. So the community didn't really have, the people that were responding, there were traits associated with those of a lack of trust as to what the motivation was for this initiative. The positive, though, is being able to validate a component of the selection process to see that there were not indicators of adverse impact, to see that there were not indicators of subgroup differences, that the community evaluators rater agreement was consistent with previous years. So it showed that there was that level of agreement where there was cohesiveness amongst the panel. And then the very light small group of a litmus test to see the shift in attitudes and perceptions, to me, is an indicator that this is something that should be given more attention. Thank you.
Sure. Our next question is for Mimi. One of the challenges that jurisdictions face in engaging with communities is developing a comprehensive approach that is representative of all community voices. How would you recommend police and other city partners address this challenge through research and data?
I think first we have to acknowledge the fact that, like, despite decades of advocacy, we've yet to see real broad-reaching changes within law enforcement, right, in America. That that could even that a lot of times we talk about, like, rebuilding trust within a. But when you say that to people that come from where I come from, we question, like, there's never been trust there. We've never experienced that. We don't even know what that looks like. So, for me, it would mean that there is this equal exchange of information happening all the time. So it wouldn't be that much more difficult for me to gather information and data from a police department. I think that's number one, is sharing data, making that more open. And I know that we're trying to get there, but really understanding how data can be used by communities with communities in a better, smarter way. And then the next one is actually, respecting when you do invite in your community members to whether it's the CARE model or the very many other models that you're using, really validate their experience, because they're experts in it. Almost every single case, we do have solutions to our own issues. And so validating that experience is number one. I can't tell you how many times that I've been invited in to do work and have even been looked down upon by other academics because, I'm representing a Black-led research organization with all Black women scientists, right? Like, it's astounding the way that even having to break out of that is difficult. So just the mutual respect, number one, being open to share data, number two, and then thinking outside the box when you do go out and work with community members. Don't just go, and I tell this here in the Austin area, I tell police departments, you don't got to just go to UT, go to Houston Tillotson University, okay? Knock on their door, and so forth. So I hope that provides a little bit of answers to that.
Yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about the impact that you've seen as a result of your work as it relates to increasing the community's trust in police and vice versa?
Yeah, again, I mean, at the end of the day, Crystal and group, our impact's really going to be measured in the decrease of unarmed people being shot by police. It's going to be measured in the number of mental health calls that are answered by qualified services not leading to death, or the number of officers that come home safely at night. It's going to be measured in the number of new data chiefs that are hired at the 18,000 police departments that we have in America. It's going to be numbered in the number of police departments that require a 4-year college degree in order to become a police officer. It's that's how we're going to be able to measure. So long story short, it's really to me it's too early to even think about measuring for trust or thinking about understanding how trust is a thing or is not a thing. We have way too much work to get there.
All right, we have one final question in our Q&A pod, and I will actually punt this to the entire group. There's a lot of conversation around the availability and sharing of data. Who controls these mechanisms, and who can mandate that it be collected and stored in a shareable format? Any thoughts from our panelists on that?
Well, one thing I can say is, on a national level, NIJ, National Institute of Justice, has a vast amount of data. But the one thing I say to every police department that I've ever worked with, buddy up with your local university. There are PhDs out there that they live just to do research. No money is changing hands. So getting data from a local university or looking at the publications is a good way to do it. But there's really robust data from the National Institute of Justice, the COPS office, the DOJ has a lot of stuff.
I also want to just to kind of piggyback on that. Yes, bravo. That's exactly what needs to happen, Lorenzo. And then also to add to that, one workshop that Measure does, and the Big Data Community Policing Conference, which, by the way, we're thinking about naming it Big Data Public Safety Conference, is, hiring the CDO, like making sure that your department has a great chief data officer. And thankfully we were able to work really well with Austin Police Department, and now they've just hired, it's been almost within this last year, but they've hired their CDO, which we're really excited about. But that was because we were able to make these connections. There was a great CDO, Dr. Poor, in Houston, that commands that department. And so she's one of the trainers at Big Data Community Policing. She shared how to really develop a CDO office, what that looks like, what that means. It's a new thing. And so the more sharing of that information on how to create a CDO office that really takes that data, that police data, and knows how to disseminate it is really, really important.
Thank you. Before we actually turn this symposium back over to Dr. Strom, I'd like to give a huge thank you to our panelists today, Dr. Hutchinson, Sergeant Todd, Commander Warwick, who had to leave, Mimi Stiles, and Dr. Boyd. And I'd also like to invite Jen to close us out with any of her thoughts regarding this very important and critical topic.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, I just wanted to thank all of you for participating. I think we covered such an interesting variety of topics, and I took about a zillion notes, as I think other people have, and there have been some great comments in the chat this whole time that I think, some of you have seen, and, around some really critical issues, like, even around the words that we're using to talk about these issues, right? Like, what is the meaning of this? How do we have productive dialogue? And there are cross-cutting issues, I think, that we're identifying that are still relevant to all of this. So my ask is just that, we as participants and as speakers here, just keep in touch and keep this conversation moving. And I think there's a lot to follow up on. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. And I'm coming away with this, really hopeful and with some great ideas. So thanks again.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
All right, thank you. I know we're almost at the top of the hour. Just a few closing thoughts, and also just wanted to kind of talk about some next steps. But thanks again to everybody who participated and who attended. I mean, we had a really good turnout, and I know it's a long time to be on Zoom, but we had such a good number of folks, experts to participate. We just wanted to make sure that we gave everybody time. But just some of the key themes that really jumped out at me, this idea of research informed and data driven, but the need to really develop more standards, guidelines, practices that are driven by research and data, but also we're kind of building the plane as we fly, and how do we do that in a responsible way? And I think there was a lot of good examples of that, of sort of testing things out. We can't always wait for the evidence base to be fully formed until we try things, but it's good to have that balance, and even around some of the things that have been learned so far. For example, the use the use of force, this idea of involuntary commitments. I mean, that came up across multiple panels. There are things that I think all of us are aware of, and the data is supporting that we need to find different ways for handling. And I think there was multiple folks that talked about ways of doing that. I also wanted to mention this idea of linkages between the system, and that maybe start with the 911 call. It may be other ways of talking about integrating use of force into these discussions, like what started the event. And I really liked what LAPD talked about sometimes the 911 call is sort of thought of as isolated, but they're sort of building it in, scheduling, linkages, this idea of a continuity of treatment, and shared goals. That was another big one. I heard that a lot of groups coming together, law enforcement and other groups, to develop shared goals around these strategies. Data, of course, is at the heart of a lot of what we do, and it was talked about a lot. I think the importance of data, but also data that is supported with standards and definitions. I mean, ultimately, if we can get to a place where we have standardized data, it's going to help us. It's going to help us at an individual jurisdiction level, and it's going to help us across jurisdictions. But also data, it's really important. Data quality isn't always a real sexy theme, but the importance of data that's quality and that the community can trust. It's been something that's sort of been a key goal of mine is how do we get to a point where people trust the data at all levels? And I think it's a tough goal, but I think it's something that through a lot of these things we're talking about with transparency and acknowledging the limitations of some of these data, that hopefully we can get at with having trust in the data that is available. Public engagement and education, whether that be a feedback loop for officers or other ways to really engage the public. And that could be through the 911 system. It could be through what the police do, which I think that was another theme that came up a lot, is better understanding of what the police do. But also that idea of building, and I think we heard that from Dr. Boyd and others, of bringing the community in early from the very start. Not community engagement does not necessarily mean bringing them in at the end and saying, hey, here's what we did or what we're going to do, bringing them in at the very start. And one of the other things that's been something that I know is really, I feel very strongly about, and I think collectively we can continue to make this push, but there really needs to be an investment. Making the investment, Chief Skinner talked about that. It's something that I've talked about in other areas, including how we support victims of violent crime. But the society wants a lot of things out of our systems, and we can only get there if we're willing to invest in these things, and investing across the system, not just in the initial response, not just in the law enforcement role, but also on the back end to make sure that we can get to a point where we're trying to help fix some of these problems, as opposed to just that reoccurring wheel. So the term which comes up a lot over this past year about rethinking policing. Then we talked in this last time about rethinking training, rethinking community engagement, rethinking data sharing and data access, rethinking partnerships, and I think all those things are so critical. And I think I really am encouraged at the level of consideration that's going on today, and that everyone's doing in their work. So I just appreciate all that. A few technical things. Again, we are going to archive these. We'll probably split them up, so all those will be available. And then also certificates. If contact us, shoot Peyton a note or anybody on the RTI team, and we'll make sure if you're on the law enforcement side, you want to get a certificate for attending today, we will do that. Last but not least, there's a lot of work, even with virtual events. In some ways, are almost more work than in-person events. But I did want to take time, of course, to thank all of our panelists for the work they put in to preparing and for talking with us beforehand, for everything they provided. But also on the RTI side, Peyton Attaway was really the really wizard behind the machine, working a lot of things and put a lot of time into engaging with all our panelists. And so definitely big credit to her for working closely with me and others to making this event happen. But also Amanda Young and Crystal Day supported Peyton on that, and also Amanda Gage and her intern Lydia. On the technical side, we have a great team at RTI who helped us produce, handle the Zoom room and all the technical things and make it look seamless. Shane Hamstra, Cameron Johnson, and also Patrick Ahern. And thanks to our partners at the North Carolina Justice Academy and all of our partners in law enforcement and in other sectors that we really enjoy working with and really see as partners on our everyday work. So again, thanks everybody for, I think, a really interesting and compelling and hopefully motivating day. We will be in touch. There is also the review form that everybody should fill out. Peyton will be sending that out in terms of any feedback you have on the event. That's always very helpful. And we would like to hear from folks. If folks have follow-up questions, if you have ideas for the next symposium or other things you would like to see, please reach out. Even if it's just a question, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again. Hope everybody has a great night. Have a safe night, and we will see you soon.